Today we're going to debunk some of the most common myths when it comes to electric cars. This is the Evolution Show. Welcome to the Evolution Show. I'm your host Johan Landgren. And today we're going to go through some of the most common misconceptions when it comes to electric cars. And to help me, I have an electric car expert, Tibor Blomhäll.
Hi, thank you.
You're a president and also chief editor and founder of Tesla Club Sweden.
Yep.
You're also a columnist for an electric car magazine, Elbilen Sweden.
Yes.
And you're writing about electric cars on a daily basis, you can say, during the weekdays.
Yeah, I do it instead of having a life.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. But what I like with Tesla Club Sweden, I mean, it's Tesla. Tesla is the name, so people may think that it's all about Teslas. But what I like about Tesla Club Sweden and all your articles, it's that they're covering all kinds of electric cars and sometimes even buses and things like that. And you're trying to stick to the facts, trying to be keeping it simple, but also going in depth. So you're giving advice for newbies. Sometimes people are not so familiar with electric cars and they want to learn more. Then you have a ton of stuff on your site. And I also noticed that the forum in the recent years, if you go into your site, there are a lot of people from all over discussing electric cars. So I think you've created this platform for a lot of Swedes that are really appreciated, including myself. I've learned a lot thanks to all your articles. So I appreciate really what you do.
Thank you. I mean, we are the biggest electric car club in Sweden, and we were the first to. So that's why we are not only Tesla, even though the name is Tesla Club Sweden, but all kind of electric car owners and electric car enthusiasts are on our platform, on our forum, and that's why I try to cover this a bit more broad approach to electric cars. When we started in 2013, there were no Teslas in Sweden, so it was simple for us to be a much more open electric car club than just Teslas.
Yeah, but you also, I mean, I was going to come to that, but you've been an electric car enthusiast for a long time, as I've understood. And what did this interest come from? Now you're an electric car owner. You're an electric Tesla owner. So you've been an electric car owner for a long time, and now you have a Tesla Model 3, and I'll come back to that. But how did you come into this interest, in electric cars?
It was a purely technical point of view. I was interested in this new technology. I heard about Tesla, the very first test drive they made from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and that's when I opened my eyes that electric cars are not just golf carts.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting because you created quite some stir here in Sweden and also internationally. I think a couple of years ago you wrote an interesting article that was about two people first time encountering or making a decision at the dealership whether I should, buy this combustion-driven car, and with the idea that they had never seen or experienced one before. And it turned the table a little bit on the perspectives, I think, about what is a car and what's the difference between electric and a combustion-driven car. And
that was fun.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I think it raised a lot of questions for people, and it was fun also. You were using humor, and
yeah, I mean, I was so tired of all these articles in the newspapers when journalists try to describe electric cars for the audience, and they don't know what they're talking about. They didn't understand how an electric car works, and I thought it would be fun to turn the table around, and instead I've wrote an article like the electric cars were the normal, and someone is trying to describe a petrol engine to people. You have to put in gears, and there is no regeneration when you slow down the car, etc.
Yeah, and here in Sweden, for the Swedish audience, but also I think it's relevant for the international audience, you created this contest a couple of years ago where you were looking at different cities in Sweden and municipalities, and where is the worst city or the worst area to charge your car. And you created this prize and contest that you found the city. I don't remember which city it was the first time. Norrköping, yeah. And then you went to the city and you told the politicians, and here's the prize, and they actually received the prize.
They accepted it, yes.
Yeah.
Partly because they just made a new decision about adding new charging sites to the city. But the problem was that it was the 10th largest city in Sweden. And they had 4 electrical sockets for electric cars in the entire city.
Yeah.
No charging equipment at all, just ordinary electrical outlets.
Yeah.
And it was laughable.
Yeah.
So we created this prize, and I called them, they accepted it, and just 1 year later they have added, I don't remember, about 15 or something like that, new charging points in the city, and they have catch up with other cities in Sweden.
Yeah, and I think it might put some pressure also on other cities. So
yeah, I mean, it was nobody wants to hear that. Hi, your city is the worst.
No, that was a great incentive, I think. Yeah, and you were an early adopter. You have a Model 3 today, but you're one of the few journalists to be invited to the Tesla Model Y event recently, their new SUV, electric SUV. What's your experience? What do you think about the Model Y? What did you think about it when you saw it?
I was afraid of it to start with. The story is this. I got my Tesla Model 3 just the day before I was about to fly to the US. So I literally took my Tesla Model 3, drove it to the airport, and then I fly over to the US to see this new electric car that Tesla says will be better than Model 3. So I was a bit afraid, will I be disappointed after just one day with my Model 3? How should I put it? No, I'm not disappointed. I will keep my Model 3, but I understand people who will choose the Model Y instead. The car is, I have to be honest, the first time I saw it, it was déjà vu. I mean, it looks like a Model 3. For the naked eye, the first thing you see on the car, you don't really see that it's a bit higher, it's a bit longer. It's the similar forms as the Model 3, a bit larger, and you have better seat position in the back seat. You have better luggage space, and you have a better door to the luggage space. So it will I agree with Elon Musk, who said that they will sell more of this than the Model 3, S and the X together.
Yeah.
So it will be a very important car for Tesla, but I will keep my Model 3.
Yeah, both are, I think, beautiful looking cars. And I think also I was going to say that, I mean, I think you wrote about this several times on the Tesla Club Sweden, that already the Model 3 is the most best-selling car or something in the US, and certainly in California. And if you look at that and you extrapolate, I don't think it's, I think it's quite probably, likely, I would say, that the Model Y could be a bestseller. So that's going to be interesting to see. But I thought we could start, because now we're going to go through a lot of common myths and on electric cars. So we can start with some really old ones, some classic ones going back to the early 20th century, actually. And I was going to ask you, what do you think is the main reason in the 20th century, or trying to make it a bigger picture of what happened? Was it only, performance and range and so on? What do you think was? Could you tell us a little bit, some story or some perspective on what actually made the combustion car dominate? So, or to try, how did it change in the early 20th century? and on.
Okay. In a few people know today that in the early 20th century, that means 1900, electric cars were almost dominating. The dominating car engine in the year 1900 was the steam engine. 40% of all cars sold in the US had steam engines, and 38% of the cars sold had electric engine and batteries. They were electric cars, and only a few petrol cars were sold because petrol cars had a problem. You had this crank. You had to crank it to get started at the engine, and if you made a mistake, you could easily break your wrist. So the electric cars were immensely popular among women drivers and taxi drivers. 90% of all taxi cars in New York were electric cars. And I have found this lovely picture of the charging station for electric cars. They had hundreds, if not thousands, of these electric charging stations all around New York. So it wasn't surprising that when Henry Ford launched his T Ford, the Model T, his own wife refused to drive it. Clara Ford, she said, "There are hundreds of explosions every minute in that engine. What if one of them goes wrong?" She had a Detroit electric car, and she refused to sit in the T Ford. So actually, Henry Ford's neighbor was Thomas Edison, the famous inventor with the light bulb and everything. And Ford actually worked at Thomas Edison's laboratory before he started his own company, the Ford Motor Company. And Thomas Edison had developed a nickel-iron battery that was rechargeable and suitable for electric cars. So in January 1914, they went to the public and they showed up the first prototype of the electric T Ford. It was a T Ford without the petrol engine. They had lots of batteries, Edison's patented new batteries, and an electric motor in it. And they said that within a year, they will start mass manufacturing the electric T Ford. The car was a bit more expensive. The electric T Ford was costing $700 instead of $500 for the petrol one. Lots of money in that time, and it actually had a 160 kilometer range. It's about 100 miles. The petrol T Ford only had 200 kilometer range, 125 miles. It wasn't that long, but the main difference was that in New York you had lots of charging stations for electric cars, but you didn't have any petrol stations. If you wanted to buy gasoline for your car, you had to go to the pharmacist and buy at the pharmacy petrol. And what happened then? Well, there are two versions. Some say that the other car companies were so afraid of this new electric car that will be mass produced by Ford that they sabotaged the development. Finally, it culminated in burning down actually the whole laboratory. So everything went to ashes. But if you don't have a tinfoil hat, then there is a B version that Edison's battery had a long range, but it had very poor power output. So that the top speed of the car was only about 30 kilometers per hour. That's 20 miles per hour. The combustion engine T Ford was twice as fast. And then came the First World War. And I say that the man who killed the electric car first time around, there is a movie about who killed the electric car, but the first time around, the man who killed the electric car, his name is Alexander Churchward. He was the lead develop engineer of this electric T Ford. But when the project was halted, he left the company and he started his own company, the ABC Starter Company. And they started to manufacture starter motors. That was a new one. You didn't have to crank the engine running anymore. You just pressed a button and an electric engine started the motor. An electric motor started the engine. So in a way, the electric car was killed by the electric motor.
Yeah,
that's
an irony.
Yeah, that's an irony, if something. And after the First World War, lots of cars with combustion engines had starter motors. There started to appear a lot of gas stations, and the era of electric cars was over for now, for them.
Yeah. Really interesting. And I thought I'd mention also Thomas Edison. I read about his batteries and I saw this show on Jay Leno. He has Jay Leno's Garage, this famous show also on YouTube. And I think he has a Baker Electric. And Baker Electric was really like between 1900 and 1907 or something like that. And then they were just gone after that. And Detroit Electric, that was later, and they were even bigger. But I remember that Jay Leno said that he had kept the original Thomas Edison, the nickel iron battery, I think. And they just used another liquid, put in that, and he added some more batteries onto the same Baker Electric he has, and he can still drive it. And he said it was like there's no maintenance basically on that car. So it's fantastic to see that. But I also would like to add just a little bit to what you said, I think, because when I was doing my research I wrote a book about going from our oil-dependent economy to something more sustainable, and I was researching on electric transports, and I found this in a book that electric cars were not just killed by, as we said, performance and so on from the competition in the combustion engine, but if we think about it, in the early 20th century, in 1900s, US was number one when it came to electrification in general. And today we have China being the number one, but in the early 1900s it was US. And partly because they had such a great railway system and also light rail system. So basically in all cities there were light rails. But what happened, what I learned was that the biggest company, car company, GM, and also Standard Oil, the biggest oil company at the time, and another company called Rubber and Tire, they actually bought and acquired different railway lines, and then they dismantled them. So they erased the competition in a very unfair way, you could say. And later on, there were federal investigations and so on that came to the conclusion that they had actually been conspired to dismantle the railway system. And of course this added to the pressure on electric cars, that there were a lot of advertisement at the time that said that go and buy the combustion car, it's the best thing. And it's a little bit funny also, because if you go back, take a step back, even before the electric car, there were advertisement for having the car instead of the horse. But I remember one thing, and that's interesting that you mentioned that it was not easy for a woman to get a car to start. So this with the hand cranking the car to get it to start. So therefore, they also chose the electric cars. It was easier to go with that. So it was really unfortunate, I think, that we had this fantastic electrification. And you've been to San Francisco, and I've been to San Francisco, and I love to see. I loved when I saw all these light rails everywhere, the old ones and the cable cars, and they've kept that. And when I heard about the story that LA was at the time just like San Francisco is today. They had a lot of light rails and electric cars and everything. And today it's just pavement everywhere. It's hard to go. You have to, I mean, if you want to walk somewhere, I haven't been to LA, but I've heard about it.
It's impossible.
It's impossible, yeah. So that adds to the story. It's not only about the performance of the car and, you know, all these fantastic cars with high top speed and so on, but it was also a lot of work from GM and other companies that made it very difficult for the electrification to develop. But you had a good point, I think, that in the end, what really made it, I mean, apart from companies, people not being strong enough to influence the change and so on. I mean, today we have we have the same thing. We have Elon Musk. He is very important. But you had a point there also.
Yeah, and you don't forget that why wasn't the electric car a success in the 1900s? Why wasn't the electric car a success in the 1970s? They tried. Well, because they didn't have the batteries.
No.
The first lithium-ion battery came in 1991. Before that, we didn't have any good rechargeable batteries.
No.
The lunar car, the lunar rover that NASA sent to moon, it had a single-use battery because they couldn't have any good rechargeable batteries.
No.
So the batteries we have today in our electric cars are at least 10 times as good as the ones Edison and Ford had in their prototype.
And if anyone is interested in the some stories about it, I can just recommend a book that I wrote, that I read about. It's Why Your World is About to Get a Whole Lot Smaller by an American chief economist and writer. And there is a lot of anecdotes about what happened in the early 19th century in cars, but also something during the 70s and why people, I mean, during the 70s he mentioned an interesting thing also, that there were a lot of small cars coming after the oil crisis and so on. But then came the oil glut in the US and people turned to the big ones again. So there have been, you know, moments in history where things could have changed, but I think you cut to the core. There's still the batteries.
Yeah, there is one moment in Swedish history actually, in the 1970s when we have this oil crisis. Before that, people had a lot of oil heaters in their homes. And then came the oil crisis, the prices gone up, and everybody was afraid, how will I heat my house in the winter, and how will I drive my car? So after the oil crisis, everybody in Sweden switched to electric heaters in their homes because there was an alternative. They couldn't switch to electric cars back then because in 1970s we didn't have the batteries. So they switched to smaller cars and less fuel consumption. But today we have the alternative. So my private prophecy for the future is that the next time we have a big oil crisis, everybody will switch to electric cars. There will be a rush to car companies. Where are your electric cars? I need it now.
Yeah. And hopefully we don't have to get to that. We hopefully can prevent waiting until the bitter end. I mean, we're seeing a lot of good change now, so I hope things will happen. And that's part of why we're doing this program as well, trying to contribute to that. But okay, let's maybe we move on to some of the more modern, really typical myths we talk about today. And one of them is that there are a lot of talks about electric cars. Where does the electricity come from? If let's say it comes from coal, and if we look globally, we have to be fair. It's in general, it's 40% electricity powered from coal, and around 23 is natural gas. That's so. There's a lot of fossil. If you add even oil, this even more than that. But primarily coal, and then a little bit natural gas. So let's say that your electric car is being charged with car from the average generation, in this case coal. What do you say to people that think that this is dirty energy and so on?
Yeah, it's even have a name, the long tailpipe.
Yeah.
People say that, oh, you don't have any tailpipe on an electric car, but so what? The tailpipe is on the electric power plant, the coal power plant, and you are just you will have just as much emissions as a petrol car because your electricity has to be generated. What people forget is that electric cars are much more energy efficient. Most of the energy in a combustion engine is turned into heat. Very little of the energy in your petrol, in your gas, turns into movement forward that propels the car. They usually say that a petrol engine has an efficiency of 20%, a diesel engine 25%. Yeah, of course, there are much more efficient engines in laboratory environments, but in a real life, in a real car, it's about those numbers. On the other hand, a coal plant has an efficiency about 34%. And an electric car, an electric engine, has an efficiency of more than 90%.
Yeah.
So the energy that you generate in a coal plant is much more efficiently translated to movement forward, and not just heat in your engine.
Yeah.
And there has been all kinds of studies because people don't believe a guy talking on YouTube, just trying to convince people. But there are lots of university papers that look at how much does an electric car, how much energy does an electric car use, how much efficient are them, what's the emissions of electric cars and diesel cars. My favorite study is Free University in Brussels. They have looked at the emissions of a diesel car and emissions of electric cars driven in different countries, because the emission of the electric car is dependent on how you generate the electricity. If you generate it in a coal plant, there will be lots of emissions. If you generate the electricity in a hydropower plant, you will get much less emissions.
Yeah.
So they looked in different countries, and no country in the world has only coal power plants. But the country with most coal power plants in Europe is Poland. And they concluded that even if you drive your electric car in Poland, it emits 25% less emissions than a diesel car.
Yeah.
And I also have to add, it's a university paper. They have to stick to the numbers. We all know that diesel cars, they don't have as low emission as when tested in laboratories.
No.
There has been a lots of controversies about they actually have much higher emissions than what says on the paper.
Yeah.
But the universities still have to stick to the paper.
Oh yeah.
So in real life, I think this 25% is much more.
Yeah. And I think if you just think about it, I mean, often when they compare electric cars and combustion-driven cars in terms of emissions, they only look at the life cycle and analysis in terms of, when it comes to the electric car, they look at the different materials and so on in the batteries and so on. But when they look at the combustion-driven car, they don't take into account all the emissions when you extract the oil, for example. There is a lot of emissions and energy going into that, transporting it, manufacturing it, processing it, and so on. And when you do that, and that's what they do in the studies, I think, in the life cycle studies, the really serious journals and so on. I mean, when you count that, and also when you think about beyond 5 years or something, if you go beyond 5 years, it's very difficult for any. Maybe I think there is some studies that show that very, very small cars, combustion-driven cars, they might make it into 5-6 years. But after that, if you compare to a medium-sized electric car, there's no comparison anymore, as I understood it. I mean, in terms of emissions, they are really.
Yeah. So, one more thing that you really should look in this diagram is that different countries have different emissions from electric cars. I'm quite proud that Sweden is one of the best countries in Europe. We have the lowest emissions. Well, because we have mostly hydropower, nuclear power, and wind power. There is hardly any coal power plant in Sweden. So once you switch to electric cars, it's really easy to get even lower emissions. If you just switch the way you generate electricity in your country, it will be, your cars will get more and more clean.
Yeah. And just a small thing you might add is that the batteries can be recycled. So even if you've had a car, let's say 10-15 years, an electric car, that battery can still continue on living as a storage battery in a facility, in a home or something, together with solar energy or something like that. So people tend to forget that and the lithium, even after that, in the end, not today, they haven't that technology at the moment, but they're working on that they even can recycle the different materials and so on. So yeah.
Just one more thing before we move on.
Absolutely.
We also have this study of the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have done some very important research. They have calculated that, okay, even if you drive the electric car entirely on coal power, you don't find any country that only has coal power, but even if you do, the car will still be less emissions than a combustion engine.
And that has to do with efficiency, I guess, in the coal power plant. So and the electric car engine when they work together. Interesting. So but this is also related to the next question, I think, that when you're making the electric cars, is it worse for the environment than making the electric or diesel ones? And so far, and in that case, why?
Yeah, that's a myth that suddenly appeared a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, from somewhere, that electric cars are so dirty because they are so environmentally unfriendly to manufacture, and they are worse for the environment than making a petrol or diesel car. And yeah, they are. I mean, no question. It's worse for the environment to manufacture an electric car with electric batteries, hundreds of kilos of electric batteries, than manufacturing a petrol car where you just take a sheet of metal and form an engine tank of it. But then you have to put gas in the tank. I have this wonderful report from the German test organization TUV. They have compared the electric and petrol version of the Mercedes B-Class. Exactly the same car, the same seats, same doors, same rear view mirror, everything is the same in the car, except that one car has an electric motor and batteries, and the other one has a combustion engine. And they even took the car with the smallest combustion engine to compare it. And they compared the whole life cycle. How does it affect the environment to manufacture the car, to drive it about 100,000 miles, and that's 160,000 kilometers, and then to recycle the car at the end of its lifetime. And they concluded that manufacturing the electric car is almost twice as bad for the environment than manufacturing the petrol car. But then you start to drive the car, and the petrol car will, for every kilometer you drive, it will have lots of emissions. The electric car, once again, like you said before, depending on the electricity mix in what country you're driving, it will have different emissions. So if you drive the electric car with the standard European electricity mix, it will emit 24% less carbon dioxide in its entire lifetime than the petrol car, even though it took more to manufacture it. And if you drive the car on renewable energy sources, like hydropower or something like that, it will be 64% less emissions in the car's life cycle. So once you have driven your car 2 or 3 years, you will get back this disadvantage that manufacturing batteries are.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, and we'll add links to these reports so people can look at them themselves. Okay, so moving on to a more specific question when it comes to using your car. So when you're charging your electric battery in your electric car, some people think that it takes a long time, like it takes forever when you're stopping on a long trip. And
yeah, I mean, it takes forever. Yeah. Next question. No. I mean, wait. How many hours does it take to charge your mobile phone? You don't know. No, because you're sleeping.
No.
Yeah. In the night, when you go to sleep, you put in the charger to your mobile phone. It charges during the night. In the morning, it's fully charged, and you can use your mobile phone. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same with electric cars. When you get home, you plug in the car, and you charge it overnight. And in the morning, it's fully charged, and you can drive around the whole day without even thinking about putting petrol in the tank or something like that.
Yeah.
And in the evening, you charge your car again. It's something that people forget, that every single night you charge your electric car, so it's fully charged in the morning.
Yeah.
People says, oh, it only has a couple of 100 kilometers or miles range.
Yeah.
But you don't drive that much during the day.
No.
You go to work, you go and to the kids' school, and you do your groceries, and in the evening you charge your car again, and it's ready to go the next day.
Yeah.
So people ask me, how long does it take to charge your car? I say about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I put it in the evening, and it's fully charged in the morning.
Yeah. And that's a fantastic thing to have. You just wake up and you go to your car and and you're ready to go. And that's that's a great thing. So, but okay, but charging electric car. I mean, during longer trips, you still have to stop by a charging station, and it will take you maybe 30-40 minutes or something. But you you can mention here that you made a really long trip here in Sweden, a road trip, where you used electric car. You're going from south to north, I think. Or was
it was north to south.
Yeah, north to south. Yeah,
For foreign viewers, Sweden is a very long country. Very long country. It's about 1,000 miles in length, 1,600 kilometers, and from up in the north down to the southern point of Sweden. We had a race with a couple of electric cars. Who gets first from the northmost city in Sweden, Haparanda, to the southmost, Ystad. And I won, obviously. I drove the Tesla. It took me 20 hours and 50 minutes to drive 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 miles. And I wasn't even tired. I arrived, I was driving all day, all night, and I wasn't even tired because I wasn't driving non-stop. When you drive long distances, they usually say that after a couple of hours, you should take a break, stretch your legs, and take some fresh air before you continue. And that's exactly what you do with an electric car. After 2 or 3 hours of driving, you do want to stop for 25 minutes and stretch your legs. And that's when the car is charging. And then you continue on the next trip. So during this trip, I charge about 3 hours in total. So in theory, with a combustion engine car, I would have been there 3 hours earlier, not 21 hours, but 18 hours in theory. But I mean, in real life, I would have stopped somewhere and stretched my legs and eat and stuff like that. So on long road trips, driving an electric car is relaxing.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, good to mention here that you didn't win because you had a super fast car. I mean, Tesla obviously is the fastest car.
It wasn't a gumball race.
No.
We actually had to stick to the road signs and do not exceed the maximum speed. But I won because Tesla has the superchargers.
Yeah.
My competitors, they had to stop with at regular fast charging stations that has 50 kilowatt charging, and I could stop at Tesla superchargers.
Yeah.
I didn't even need to stop at every single one of them. I think I had 12 to choose from, and I only stopped at 7.
Yeah.
So I skipped some stations. I could select which one was more appealing for me to stop.
I don't remember if my memory serves me correct, but you mentioned that New York in the early 1900s had a lot of charging stations compared to other cities, as I understood. And that was an advantage and easier. It was easier to have an electric car already then, by the same reason. But wasn't it Nikola Tesla who actually helped to get New York more electricity, or am I incorrect? I don't remember, but I think it was at some stage he helped. It's just a side note, but
let me put it this way: Thomas Edison's idea of DC electricity didn't work.
No.
You could have electric wires perhaps 1 or 2 kilometers from the electric generator, but not longer.
No.
So it was Tesla's solution with alternate current that made it possible to have large cities and large countries equipped with electricity.
Yeah, it's funny how history comes and goes, you know.
Yeah.
But but batteries. More questions on batteries, because people are worried sometimes that they will degrade. It's the biggest cost, something like 30% of the car. It's a battery cost. So people sometimes worry that what happens if the battery is degrading with certain.
Oh no, you are too kind. They don't even say the batteries are going to degrade. they are always telling me that your car will be dead in 3 years. I do have a mobile phone. I know everything about batteries. Your car will be dead in 3 years.
Yeah.
And when I tell them that my prior electric car, I had a Nissan Leaf, that it was 6 years old, they couldn't comprehend. They knew that batteries doesn't last long, because in a mobile phone, let's face it, your battery will be dead in a couple of years. But that's because mobile phone developers don't really want you to have a working mobile phone year after year. That poor battery in your phone is tortured every day. It's charged fully every night, and it's placed next to this CPU that gets really, really hot. And there are two things that batteries don't like: to be charged 100% full, and to be hot.
Yeah.
So in electric cars, they don't really charge the batteries to 100% every day.
No.
And they are taking really good care of the batteries so they don't get too hot or too cold. So that's why the electric car batteries actually last longer than the car itself. Most manufacturers have a warranty of about 8 years, but we have seen, I mean, it's not theory anymore.
No.
A few years ago, people said, "Oh, your batteries will die," and I said, "I don't think so," but I couldn't argue with them. But I mean, the Tesla Model S is 7 years old now. There are 7-year-old electric cars driving around, and they're still fine. Nobody has to stop with dead batteries and so.
No.
There are lots of statistics, like this one from the Tesla Club Belgium, that have collected batteries data from hundreds of cars. And as you can see, after 5 years, or about 280,000 kilometers, that's 175,000 miles, the batteries have degraded about 10%. That means that if you bought a car as a new one, after 5 years, you can go 10% shorter than a new car. And actually, that statistics look scary. The actual scale is like this. Even after 5 years, it's only 10%. You still have 90% of your battery capacity left. So the electric cars batteries, let me put it this way. A couple of years ago, we were hoping that the batteries will last longer than the car. Now we know.
Yeah.
It's not guessing anymore. It's not discussions. We know that the batteries last longer than the car.
Yeah.
And even after the car has been reached its end of lifetime, you crush the car, but you keep the batteries.
Yeah.
The batteries will continue to be used in homes, in power plants, so they still have lots of years to be useful.
But then there are also some advice, some tips you can use to keep the health. I mean, to maintain the health of the battery even better. I mean, in terms of degrading, I know you've written about this extensively, but I also know that between 20 and 80%, if you try to keep the charging in between there, not going below 20 so often, and if you do, charge as soon as possible. And I know that you even came up with the number of between 20 and 75. That 75 is perhaps the optimum.
Yeah, it's called the NASA diet.
Yeah.
The NASA diet. When NASA sends probes to Mars and other planets, they can't just send a mechanic and switch the batteries. So it's actually them who has said that if you don't charge the battery more than 80% and you don't go below 20% charge, it will last a lot longer.
Yeah. And that's enough.
I mean, most electric cars in everyday use, you charge them to 80-90%.
Yeah.
That's the default setting in the car.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can set that on by yourself in your car now with the Tesla and so on. But also, I think it's good to mention with the phones that if you want to keep them in shape, I know that I have had a phone, a Samsung Galaxy phone, for quite some years without replacing the battery. And what I did, I absolutely never charged them in the nighttime. Part of it's because I've heard, these stories that if you're really unlucky, it might burn. But more that I was thinking about the battery, that, if I keep it plugged in, it will stay at 100% and it won't go down. So, I mean, if you charge your phone, try to do it in daytime, I would suggest, and unplug.
Actually, there are some apps that charge the batteries to 100% at the time the alarm goes off.
I didn't know that, actually. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Improvement there. So, but another question also about batteries, the lithium. Lithium is often mentioned as, when they are producing or taking out the lithium and also cobalt. It's in an unfriendly way, either by using a lot of water in South America when you do it out in this salt desert.
Oh, it's even worse. You have seen these pictures of lithium mines.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, they are terrible.
Yeah.
Except that they are not lithium mines.
No. And also the cobalt coming something like 40% from
Congo.
Congo,
oh,
yes.
It's
yes.
child labor.
Yes.
Your electric car is child labor and terrible for the environment.
Yeah. So what do you say about that?
Well, to start with, as you mentioned, the lithium is not from mines, but from salt lakes. You have all these salt lakes with lithium salts in it, and then you vaporize the water, and the lithium stays behind. And there are actually no cobalt mines either, because cobalt is a byproduct from copper and nickel mines. So it wasn't really a very desired metal, cobalt, before. People didn't know what to use it for. So there are lots of copper and nickel mines who doesn't extract the cobalt from their mines. They go only for the copper and nickel. And what we have seen in the last couple of years, that mines open up to extract cobalt too, all over the world. I have heard of Swedish mines who are actually looking at going back to the stuff they left outside, and they realized that the stuff they left outside after they took the copper and nickel, it contains lots of cobalt, and now it's a valuable material.
Yeah. Yeah, and Northvolt, with this Swedish battery company startup right now, and I know this Peter Carlson is actually worked at Tesla, so he had a lot of experience with that. But they talk about extracting, as you said, lithium either from Sweden, but also a lot from Finland, because Finland has a lot of lithium, apparently.
Yeah, and cobalt.
And cobalt.
And so you must remember that it's not only in Congo that you have cobalt.
No.
Yes, in Congo you have cobalt mines, and they are using sometimes child labor, and that's bad.
Yeah.
But there are lots of other mines around the world that are normal mines with normal labor that extract cobalt, nickel, and actually the largest ingredient in a lithium ion battery, it's aluminium and copper. It's called lithium battery because the active ingredient is lithium, but it's only about 1% of the battery that actually is lithium. People think there are hundreds of kilograms of lithium in this battery. Yeah. So I also heard people telling me about that with all these electric cars, the lithium in the world will end.
Yeah. So let's continue with the lithium then. Are we going to run out soon, or what's the problem there?
Well, not soon. The lithium is almost the same as cobalt. There has been lithium mines and lithium extractions, but it wasn't really a very commercial value in lithium before. Now that there are more value in lithium, we will have more people who are going to find lithium mines, lithium lakes, and there is this investigation from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology that if you convert all the cars in the world, every single one, to electric cars, and you give a 100 kilowatt hour battery to each of every car, you will use about half of the commercial available lithium in the world. today. I mean, the commercially available lithium.
Yeah.
Because there are vast quantities of lithium that are not commercially available yet.
No. And as I understood, I mean, lithium is one of the most common substances we have on the planet.
Yeah, and one more thing. The lithium and the cobalt and the other material in the battery, they will not get old.
No.
You can get an old battery, tear it apart, extract the lithium and the cobalt and the copper and the aluminium from that battery and build new ones. Actually, in the future, it will be cheaper to just take a bunch of old batteries because you get a really nice quality of the metals instead of going around and trying to find it and dig it up from the earth. We don't really have recycling of batteries today yet, because the batteries we are using are mostly in small mobile phones, in tools, etc. There are lots of different battery sizes and shapes. So the recycling that we have today is done in really as a handcraft. It's not automized. But once you will get millions of batteries that are exactly the same shape, exactly the same size, exactly the same chemistry in them, then we can have automatic processing lines that can recycle batteries, and then we can get much more of the materials inside the batteries and reuse them.
How about if the number of cars increase as we expect, electric cars? A lot of people are raising questions then about how's the grid, the electric grid, how it's going to handle this. If the demand peaks at a certain time and we have millions or at least thousands of electric cars in an area charging from the grid at the same time. In Sweden, we can mention that we have problems on another side of it. Another aspect is that we have a lot of companies now coming and building big, huge server facilities and so on, drawing a lot of energy from the grid. And at the same time, then we have a lot of cars coming at the same time to charge. From a grid that is not expanding. We have an old grid in Sweden, and I know a lot of other countries are depending on an old infrastructure. So how do we handle that?
Yeah, it's really a local and a global question. Let's start it locally. I mean, really locally. Your own house. In an average villa or house of today, you have new household appliances that are low power household appliances. You have all this A++ grading of them. What has happened is, since the 1990s, with your old appliances, the power needed for your villa has been reduced by around 2,500 kilowatt hours per year, by switching to low energy lamps, by buying that new washing machine, that new refrigerator, etc. Each and every one of them has lower electric need than the old ones. So you have saved about 2,500 kilowatts a year with your new appliances. Well, an electric car uses about 2,500 kilowatt hour per year. So when you buy your electric car, your consumption will go back to the same level as it was in the 1990s. So your house could handle that in the 1990s. It can still handle it today. That's locally. Because one thing that people doesn't realize, that an electric car that is charging, it consumes about the same amount of power like an electric heater. It's not really that much, and it consumes it during the night when the rest of your house is switched off. You're sleeping. So locally you don't have any problem really. Globally, you might have problems if every single one switches to electric cars. It will not happen overnight, even though we would like to, but it will take some years, and it will take some years for the electric grid to be adjusted. You will need, for certain areas, you will need to have better power supply. Actually, the newer the neighborhood is, the bigger problem you have. Because the old neighborhood, it was designed for those old electric appliances. But the new neighborhood, they already designed it for low energy lamps, etc. So they don't have as much power as excessive power as the old ones. So fast charging stations, they might be a problem because they consume a lot of energy in daytime at one place. A fast charging station draws about the same amount of power like a construction site or a supermarket, and you will need to have all this power in all around the city, etc. So they might be a bigger challenge than home charging, but still we have a couple of years to adapt, and all you need is some cables.
Yeah, and I was going to suggest an idea there. I talked with a friend about this and about the charging challenge we have there. But let's say that this is actually a problem during a some peak hours. There are certain days during a week that eventually we will have this, also Tesla's new ones with 250 kilowatts and so on. And we're talking about huge station. As you said, it's basically similar to a supermarket or something like that in terms of drawing energy. But what we could do, I think, with if you add a lot of battery storage at this facility, Tesla could do that. It would cost them money, sure, but it would handle the peak hours. And then during the night or during the off-peak hours, you could charge the batteries again from the grid. And then during the night there will still not be any cars there and so on, so they can, there will be some few, but then there's no you won't draw so much energy from the grid. So could that be part of the solution?
Yeah, and it's even better than that, because if you have switched all the cars to electric cars, you will have all this battery capacity in every single home. So electrical companies are very interested in using electric car batteries as battery storage. Vehicle to grid, it's called.
Yeah.
And I have spoken to several electric car companies that they are suggesting that if we can borrow 25% of your car's battery capacity, we don't even need the whole battery, just 25% of your battery's capacity. We will give you the electricity for your car for free as a compensation, because they want this ability to have. With a couple of 100,000 cars, it will be terawatt hours of electricity storage, and they can use the electric cars. It will not be a problem for them; it will be a solution.
Yeah,
they can use these batteries to store electricity, as you described, for later use. So they are looking forward to having electric cars on their grid, because it will have a dampening effect. Because now it's the peak hours, you have lots of energy, and then you have low usage, and they have to adapt all the time with their. Electricity is instantaneous.
Yeah.
The same second that you use the energy for this lamp, you need to generate that electricity in one generator. If I turn on another lamp, they have to turn on little bit more power in their electricity plant, and it's very expensive to have these the electricity plants that can adopt very rapidly
Yeah.
to changes.
Yeah.
It's much easier if they have this huge backup battery. They can just use them. Tesla has built a giant battery storage facility in southern Australia. They thought they will use it as a storage for this wind farm. When there is wind blowing but not much demand for electricity, they will store the electricity and sell it later. It sounded fun. What they didn't realize is that this battery storage facility became a giant backup for the whole countryside. It's like you have this backup power for your computer. There was this one incident when the coal power plant suddenly stopped, and the electricity was missing from the grid. And within a couple of milliseconds, the Tesla battery came in and supplied power. Usually it takes about 6 seconds to start the emergency backup generators that power companies have. And they are extremely expensive, and that's why the power from them is also extremely expensive. The electricity bill goes up when they're using them. So suddenly the Tesla batteries has turned the whole idea of these backup power plants around. Suddenly they didn't need the backup power plant because they had the backup battery. And now the local authorities, they want to build 50,000 homes. And in every single home there will be a battery, a home battery of a couple of kilowatt hours. And the people living there will get the batteries for free, just so that they can use these batteries as a backup plant. So switching to electric cars, lots of people are talking about the problems, but actually the electrical companies sees a lot of new, very interesting solutions.
And I can just end this kind of myth by also mentioning that the vehicle-to-grid technology also opens up for using the surplus power from wind and power. So I read about an area in the Netherlands where they were looking at vehicle-to-grid technology, where they talked about using some portion of your battery during the night or during off-peak hour, or if you knew you had an app or so and you said that on Monday I'm not going to use my car, you can use 20%, it will be plugged in, use 20% of my battery for the grid. And that's great, because then you can use the surplus power that you produce oftentimes with the wind and the solar energy. And you can make use of that. Otherwise, you can't use that. So that's a great combination, I think.
Yeah,
so
one important outcome of this battery in southern Australia was that, as you say, they fill up the batteries with extremely cheap electricity. When nobody else wants to buy electricity, they put it in the batteries. It's almost free. And they use the power from the batteries when electricity, there's a peak demand in electricity, when electricity is expensive. I mean, really, really expensive. So the other electrical companies were kind of laughing that, yeah, right, you put these batteries here, you can power this countryside 5 minutes with the power in those batteries. But they forgot that it was the most expensive 5 minutes, the 5 minutes that they made most money from when there was peak demand and high electricity prices. And the power company that uses the battery now, they can sell that electricity that was dirt cheap, almost nothing to produce. They can store it and sell it when it's really expensive and useful.
I think we mentioned this already, but oftentimes you also mentioned that the batteries are very expensive compared to since they are such a big part of the cost of the electric car. We will never see a comparably priced electric car simply because the batteries cost is too high compared to a diesel and a petrol car. What do you say about that?
Well, I mean, it's new technology. The first flat screen TV I saw in 1990s, it cost like a small car, and it was very bad picture on it. But today you can buy a flat screen TV almost for free, and it has 4K resolution, if not higher. So electric cars are really in the beginning of their journey. We have seen the first generation electric cars with very limited range because the batteries were so expensive. Now there are coming the second generation electric cars with more acceptable ranges. I mean, 300, 500 kilometers. And they are getting, if not cheaper, you get more and more range for the same price. So researchers say that around in 2025 or 2035, depending on how optimistic or pessimistic you are, electric cars will be as cheap as petrol cars to buy. But I would say that already today, it's cheaper to have an electric car if you're driving really many kilometers per year. So if you are we have in Tesla Club Sweden, we have members who are driving 35,000 kilometers per year. That's about 22,000 miles. And they say that it's cheaper for me to have an electric car with European petrol prices. It's cheaper to me have an electric car than a petrol car. Because yes, they are more expensive to buy, but then the electricity I need to drive around is so cheap. So it will be cheaper to have the electric car in the end.
As a follow-up on that, then let's say that you run out of juice, you have no more electricity in your battery, no energy. What do you do?
Oh, it's my favorite. But what will you do if you have no more electricity in your car? What will you do? I usually say that I go to the nearest house and I knock on the door. I think it's more likely that they will have an electric socket I can lend than they have a can of gasoline that I can borrow. It's much easier to get electricity to your electric car than it is to get petrol to your petrol car. Okay, it's not that fast to fill up from an ordinary home socket, but it works. There has been around the world races with electric cars. That electric cars actually circumnavigated the Earth and went to, I mean, in the middle of the Gobi Desert, they could find electricity. Because at the oasis, when they arrived, there is people, and when there is people, when there is homes, there are electricity. So they could literally go anywhere in the world and find electricity to charge their cars.
Yeah, it sounds promising. But more to a practical matter then. Okay, you have your electric car, you want to use it for everything. You only want to have one car. There's been a lot of discussions about that too, that if you have electric car, you also have to have a second car just in case you mean for longer range or for towing anything. And let's move on. Let's focus on the towing part. Can you tow with an electric car, and can you use that in an everyday situation?
Oh yes, I can. It's changing about right now, because the first electric cars, they had so short range that putting a towing bar on them would have cut the range in half. I mean, if if you put something, if you tow something with your car, your range will suffer. It's the same for electric cars, and it's the same for cars with combustion engines. Your range will suffer. And with the first electric cars, they didn't have much range. They didn't want to have even shorter range when towing, so they decided not to put towing hook on the cars. But actually, the electric motor is very good. It's very powerful. It's very good for pulling stuff, towing stuff. So what we see now is that the new generation electric cars with longer ranges, people are starting to talk about towing hook, and several cars are being equipped now or in the near future with hooks. It's also, I mean, in the Europe, we are used to tow stuff. In the US, they have these pickup trucks. We don't have that in Europe. If I have bought anything at IKEA and I want to take it home, in the US, you just take your pickup truck. In Europe, I rent and tow it to home. I rent a trailer and tow it home.
Mm. So it's a kind of a cultural thing there, you could say.
Yeah. I didn't realize it until I spoke to Tesla about it.
No.
We have tried to convince Tesla to put towing hooks on their cars, and they said that, well, we do have it on a Model X. Yeah, it's a big SUV, and big SUVs have towing hooks in the US too. But small cars, I mean, in Europe we have really tiny cars with a towing hook. You are not going to tow a big trailer with it, but a small one with just some furniture on it.
Yeah. And I think also you have to look at the specifications. In Sweden, you have to think about the weight of the car. So it is also dependent on that. So it's not only that you have a hook. So certain cars you can tow a lot, and others you can't, depending on the weight of the car. So you look at both the weight of the car and the carriage that you're towing. So the other factors playing in.
We did some questions. I mean, there are about 5,000 members of Tesla Club Sweden. So it's really easy to get statistics. We just put it on the forum, a question, and people click on the answers, and we get instant statistics. So we ask people that how important is a towing hook on your Tesla Model 3? It was the question. And 25% said that without a towing hook, I'm not interested in the car. So it's that important here in Sweden and in Europe.
Let's hope some Tesla, guy listen to this. Some from Tesla company.
They have. I mean, Elon Musk has promised that the Model 3 and Model Y will have towing hook.
Yeah,
it's just not there yet.
No. Okay, but then we're also looking at the issue of, is the electric car more dangerous than the petrol car? I mean, is the electric battery going to explode if you smash into another car or something like that? Yeah. Is it a ticking bomb on the road? What do you say about that?
I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of fires in petrol cars every single day around the world, and nobody cares. You just ignore them. But if one single electric car catches fire, it's news all around the world, because it's new technology. People are afraid of new technology. And newspapers know about it, so nobody will read an article about, yet another combustion engine car went up in flames. Yeah, so what? It happens.
Yeah.
But everybody wants to read about, an electric car caught fire and went up in flames. By the way, that one is not an electric car on the picture. I just drove to my work one day, and there it was, this car in flames. Electric cars doesn't burn like that, and there is no explosion like a fireball. When the batteries overheat, you will have plenty of time to get out of the car. I mean, several minutes, and then it will start to burn with flames. It never explodes like in the movies. It's the battery cells might explode like firecrackers or small projectiles, but it's not like you have this big tank full of combustible liquid that pours out beneath the car and starts burning.
No. And maybe the more important thing is that the firefighters are trained, because okay, yes, if it happens, it's electricity and the battery is dangerous. You have to know how to work and handle it. And there are videos on that and education they can go.
They have lots of educations. And one thing that people don't understand it's you put out a battery fire with water, lots of water. But isn't it dangerous with electricity? No, the electricity cuts off the same moment the car realizes that it's on fire. And we also had some reports in Sweden, I mean, I think also in globally, that there are some hazardous gases that are emitted from the batteries when they are burning. And yes, it's true, batteries emit some gases when they burn. But the biggest source of hazardous gases when a car is on fire is from the AC liquid you use for your air conditioning.
Oh, we have I don't have so many questions left, but one question is that actually the electric car is too silent. It might. People won't hear it when it's especially in the parking areas when it's driving very slow on.
And blind people.
Blind people, yes.
I kill a blind people every day. I mean, they are just walking right in front of my car, and no. I mean, to start with blind people, what I have seen and what I have heard from blind people is that modern cars today are so silent. Even combustion engine cars, that they don't listen for the engine noise. They listen for the tires, because the tires make sound when you drive on the road. So they don't have the same problem as ordinary people with iPhones have. I mean, it's much worse when people walk around looking at their phones and doesn't look at the traffic around them.
Yeah, really.
So there is some legislation coming, I think next year or the year after that will make electric cars produce noise, so that people can hear the electric cars and watch out for them. This noise that are generated by electric cars, it's already there in the Nissan Leaf. The very first Nissan Leaf in 2011, 12, perhaps 2010, the very first Nissan Leaf already had this sound many years ago. And as a Leaf owner, I can tell you that it's completely useless. People doesn't realize that this sound behind them is from an electric car, because it's not really the engine noise that tells people to move. If you are, let's say you're in a parking area, you are driving slowly in your combustion engine car, people are walking in front of you, what are you doing? You press the gas pedal slightly, so the motor rumbles, and then people realizes, oh, it's a car there. Oh, sorry. But you can't do that with this electric car noise that they are proposing. It's just a single tone woo, noise. You can't make it to alert people that you are coming.
No, it's too monotone. It's a single. You can't single it out.
And so actually, I'm every time I hear about this coming legislation about sounds for the electric cars, I get it reminds me of in 1865. In 1865, cars were completely new technology. Oh, it's a carriage without any horses in front of it. It's dangerous. So they had the Red Flag Act, it was called, in 1865, that in front of every car, a man has to walk in front of every car carrying a red flag that should warn it should warn people that here it comes a car without horses in front of it. I mean, it wasn't because of the noise, because all old cars were noisy, but they wanted it, and it actually says in the legislation that the man should carry the red flag so that horses and pregnant women are not alarmed. And I mean, the legislators back then in 1865, they gave it a lot of thought. It wasn't just a crazy legislation. They really wanted people to be safe with these new cars. I don't know, it's perhaps the horse dealers that told them that they should have this. And for 14 years, people were walking in front of cars. I think they were walking faster and faster for every year because the cars were getting faster. For 14 years, they walked in front of the cars, carrying this red flag before the legislation was abandoned. I think it will be the same thing with this electric cars making noise.
Hopefully not 14 years though. But who knows? Yeah, who knows? But it sounds like created from out of thin air, really. But I mean, it's not practical to have a noise, as you said, if you can't hear it.
One thing, every year we have this meeting at the Tesla Club Sweden, and around 40 or 50 electric cars. We drive into Stockholm. Electric car after electric car after electric car in a long caravan. We drive into Stockholm and we drive around in the town. And it's really interesting to see people. They are walking around in the town and they stop. Something is wrong. It's silence. You don't realize how noisy the city is, how noisy the traffic is before it's gone. But suddenly, if you have 50 electric cars, the whole street is filled with electric cars. It gets so silent, so people don't realize what it is, and when they realize, they pick up their phones and take all kind of pictures and smiles and waves at us.
Yeah, and I also like to point out now as a last question and some reflection I had when I was preparing for this interview, and I was thinking, okay, maybe this will sound like we're presenting everything like the electric cars is super and there's nothing wrong with them at all and so on. But maybe we should lift the question to another level and think about that the biggest challenges in general, not only electric cars, but transports in general, is that we're moving now towards self-driving technology and self-driving transports. And as we're going to talk about in the later show, in the next show, the challenges might be that we have so many self-driving electric cars everywhere, and people are sending in them everywhere to run errands and so on, picking stuff up, delivering stuff, that they are driving more than they are doing than they are today, and that maybe that's the biggest challenge. How do we make it easier to share transport? Of course, there are people who won't like to share it, but there are a lot of people who would like to, as a public transit solution, as a shared mobility solution. and how we can move in that direction. Maybe that's the biggest challenge. Maybe that's where we should focus to make because obviously electric is coming. There are so many benefits, as we have spoken about today, but we also have to realize that going electric is not only the solution. We also have to think about that the self-driving technology we're going to work towards has to be solved as well. And shared mobility is one step, making it easy. I know younger people now, they don't necessarily want to own a car. It's very, very expensive. You just want to go from A to B. So how do we solve that? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, mobility as a service.
Yeah.
To start with, I mean, electric cars, they are better for the environment, but they are still bad for the environment. I mean, they are still manufactured in factories, and they are still consuming natural resources. So just switching to electric cars is not a solution. It's a way of delaying everything that's happening. We also have to reduce the number of cars, and that's where self-driving cars and car sharing comes into picture. You own a car today because the public transportation is not good enough for your needs.
Yeah,
that's why you do it, because you want to get from A to B, but there is no matching public transportation that is cheap enough, fast enough, and convenient enough for you. With self-driving cars, we will get to the point where people are looking at, why should I own my own car when I can get a self-driving taxi cab that will get to me just as convenient from A to B, but much cheaper than having my own car, because I don't have to pay for parking for it, and I don't have to pay. I don't have to buy it to start with. I just pay for the kilometers I'm riding with it. So that will be a major difference when cars are getting self-driving good enough to be self-driving taxi cabs. So you don't have to own your own car. You can just order a car with your mobile phone app. And people are telling me, yeah, it works in big cities, but not on the countryside. I would say no. Even on the countryside, there are certainly 10-15 people living close together, so that they can share one car. I have had members in Tesla Club Sweden saying that once I get a self-driving car, we don't need 2 cars or even 3 cars in the family anymore. One car can drive me to work, go back, pick up my wife, drive her to work, go back, pick up the children, and take them to school. So we don't need many cars anymore. We can share. It will be like a shared taxi within the family. We can share the car like that. But of course, the best solution is if you don't have to drive to work at all. Yeah. I mean, lots of people can work from home with emerging technologies and so. Well, obviously not if you are a lifeguard or something like that, but most of people working in offices and etc. they can just as well stay at home, and that's the best. The best transportation is the one that you don't make.
Yeah, I would like to really thank you for a great conversation, and I also like to ask you if you have any questions for me to ask for the next guest. The next guest is going to be, we're going to talk about self-driving technology and shared mobility. If you have anything you would like to ask or something for us to discuss, please go ahead.
The obvious question is when. When is it good enough, and how do you know that it's good enough? Yeah. To be released in public, self-driving cars. Also, how do you make the switch from today's cars that have some kind of driving assist technology to self-driving cars that don't need any driver anymore. There is a huge gap from today's cars. They need to be monitored constantly by the driver, to the step when you don't even need a steering wheel anymore. How can they come all the way to that point that they can remove the steering wheel?
Again, I really like to thank you, Tibor, for an interesting conversation. I really learned a lot, and I hope we can do a follow-up later and discuss some of the latest developments when it comes to electric cars. There's so much going on right now. I also would like to thank you for coming. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoyed this conversation as well, feel free to continue the conversation in the comments below. In the next episode, we'll talk about self-driving technology and shared electric mobility, together with Anna Pernestål. Anna Pernestål is a director at the Integrated Transport Research Lab at KTH Stockholm, the Royal Institute of Technology, and she's an expert on self-driving technology. We always appreciate your feedback. Was it good or bad? If you want to see the videos as soon as they come out, consider subscribing. I hope you join us in 2 weeks for the next episode.